had still been banned from the US, Sleepy Joe Biden has made this remarkable statement.
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over. If you notice, no one's wearing masks. Everybody seems to be in pretty good shape. And so I think it's changing, and I think this is a perfect example of it.
He's right, of course, about the pandemic, but his very own administration clearly don't agree, showing us once again who's actually running the show. Biden officials undercut the elderly president, telling CNN that the comments did not signal a change in policy, and there were no plans to lift the ongoing COVID-19 public health emergency, which has been in place since January 2020. Pointing to the statement, furious Americans are quite rightly questioning the justification for ongoing pandemic measures, including federal vaccine mandates on healthcare workers, military personnel, and some non-US citizens entering the country by plane. So, I mean, Megyn, is this shambolic administration suffering from a chronic case of COVID hysteria?
First of all, can we just talk about how the fact that Biden says these things is always they try to clean it up at the White House. His White House daddies always have to say, little Joey was confused again. We are not going to defend Taiwan if China tries to take over. We are not saying that the COVID pandemic is over. Where's the Easter Bunny to corral President Biden when we need him? It's embarrassing how they don't let the man say what he actually feels. And I think in this case, this was Biden actually being honest about how he feels. This was every once in a while, the truth pops out of Joe Biden's mouth. So here he says the COVID pandemic is over, and he actually means it. I think he actually does mean the thing about Taiwan. I think he lies at other times, like he certainly was lying when he told us the Afghan forces were going to stand up and not fold in a week. There are plenty of things he lies about, like inflation is transitory, but this one's true. He said the truth, and he shouldn't have been corrected by his White House daddies because the pandemic is over. There is no official metric for when a pandemic ends. It's you know it when you see it. And while it took Joe Biden a hell of a lot longer than it took the rest of us to realize this thing is over, it is. His detractors will look and say 400 people are still dying if you look at the numbers on a day, on an average daily basis over 7 days of COVID. I don't believe that. They've been telling us that all along, of COVID or with COVID, because they've been merging those two things from the beginning. You know, old people who die with COVID get counted as people who died of COVID, so they fudge the numbers. You look around, people are doing fine. They've resumed their lives. All the polls show that the people believe the pandemic is over. Only 11% of the people, and that includes the crazies who drive with the masks in their cars while alone, are actually fearful of dying of COVID. So that ought to tell you something. And they're ready to get back to their lives. Now, there's that weird contingent that can't let go of the emergency, that loves governmental powers. And there's that piece of his administration that understands he's got policies that depend on their lie, that we're stuck in perma-pandemic. For example, he just forgave hundreds of billions of dollars in student loans, it's a wealth transfer, by saying it's a COVID emergency. It's justified by okay. You just said that we're no longer in a pandemic, so how can you use the pandemic to justify that? There are other policies too. He's asking for $22 billion right now in pandemic relief. Well, do we need it? Are we in a pandemic or aren't we? Right? Like you mentioned the vaccine mandates that are in place for the military and for healthcare workers. So it's like he hasn't matched up the policy with his honest belief, but that's the next step. And if he doesn't, the lawsuits need to come quickly.